Welcome everyone to episode 7 of The Graded Escape. I'm Kelly.
And I'm Anna.
Today's episode is a special one because you all helped create it. Recently, we polled a couple of our social media sites. We looked into some questions from the YouTube page and wanted to figure out what burning questions you all had and wanted to ask an experienced educator who now homeschools. And we have quite a few questions. So today we're going to do about half of them. And then our next episode, we'll finish up with the remaining questions that we have. And then in between, if anyone has any additional questions, you can absolutely feel free to ask them. Again, you can throw them in the comments of this episode or on our Facebook page, The Graded Escape. And then Instagram as well.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. So we're diving into some real questions by real listeners. We did do our best to sort of modify them slightly, so we're not giving away any identifying information, but we've kept the gist. So whether you're brand new to homeschooling, you're feeling stuck, or just curious how to make some of this all work, our question and answer is packed with practical insights, encouragement, and honest answers straight from an educator who's been there. And I think one of the reasons that we wanted to do this episode is because kids that attend your traditional school get a little bit of face time with the teacher through parent-teacher conferences, or if they call a meeting or something like that, they're able to ask questions about scope and sequence of curriculum. How's my child doing with this? Is this typically developing? What do we need to work on? And I think one of the disadvantages to homeschooling is that you are the teacher, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't have maybe the same opportunity to consult with an educator on some of these questions that you have. Certainly there are resources to be able to do that, but we thought, we'll put an episode together where people can ask questions as if this was sort of like a parent-teacher conference, so to speak.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, like I said, we did get quite a few questions, so we're going to dive in with the first one. And we modified it, so again, to kind of protect the privacy of the details of the question itself. But it's, I have a young learner with a variety of special needs. Is homeschooling something that would be in his best interest? How do parents of learners with diverse needs homeschool? So I should preface this answer with we are doing a specific episode in about 2 from this one that dives into how you homeschool or support a homeschooler who has an IEP or 504 plan. So this is a child who's got some learning issues that needs support in different ways. And so we're going to go really deep in that episode about specific 504 plans, IEPs, individual education plans, and how you work with those as a homeschooling parent. So the short answer is yes, you can absolutely homeschool a child with special needs. And what's great is that you as the parent know your child the best. And so you can create the plan for yourself and your child based off of what their needs are. There's not one size fits all. Depends on what the issue is that your child has, whether it's development issue or a behavioral issue, academic challenge, whatever it is. You get to create the map for what your homeschool looks like. Right. So that's really great.
Yeah, and not to step on the toes too much of that episode that's coming out, but the whole point of an individualized education plan is that it's individualized, right? And that's the beauty of homeschooling, is that that's what you do, right? You look at your child and you think about what it is that they need, and then you tailor your instruction and your curriculum to that child. You're not trying to get a diverse learner to fit into the mold of a classroom of 20 to 25 kids. That's definitely an episode that's coming out, and we can talk a little bit more about the answer to this question, but just kind of knowing that that's something that's definitely on our radar. So I feel like it's one that comes up, and I think people maybe don't realize that you definitely can homeschool. They think oh no, my child has a disability, I'm not qualified to do this, and we'll talk through some of those issues as well. But certainly it is an option for you if you have a learner with diverse needs.
Yeah. And that being said, it doesn't mean that you have to do everything yourself either. So the homeschooling, format can look vastly different depending on what you want, whether you want to have classes that your child's doing online with an online instructor, or you want to have, be part of a co-op where you have other parents teaching different subjects, or you want to be doing all of that yourself and then just using, social time with kids as that social time. there's also other services that you are, you have access to as a homeschooler, a lot of ones with children. I'm just thinking of some of the ones we had thought that were the most common were, therapy services, OT, PT, ABA, services that Kelley provides. There's part-time programs, support groups, there's drop-off, homeschool. I mean, the umbrella of all different types of homeschool structures is, at times it seems almost endless, because there is just so much you can do. So you would absolutely have to give, well, one, you would need to be a parent that wants to do this. I mean, we've talked about that before. Homeschooling, just sort of an average level student, that kind of fits a lot of the quote unquote norms of a child at a certain, age, is challenging enough. So when you do have a child that's got some special needs in whatever area, you are, you're going to have to work a little harder, and you're going to have to figure out a little bit more. But that's not to say that it's not totally possible, and that, days will be messy, and some will seem like you didn't get anything done, and others will seem really productive. But that's how it goes, for all of us. Being consistent, patient, and believing in your child's abilities is kind of an overarching theme. If you can have that, then bring that to the table, and the willingness to be flexible. But you do have to want to do it, and be willing to reach out. And if they require special services, get those lined up and set up. And then, the rest you also figure out, you play around with it and see what works for you and your child.
Yeah. And a lot of, of these services, particularly like OT, occupational therapy, that may be covered under your insurance plan, depending on what type of insurance you have and what sort of, disability your child has been formally diagnosed with. So that's an option as far as like private pay. So, a child going to, a school would receive those services as a part of their IEP. But, if you're homeschooling, then you might have to seek like a private pay option. But typically, your insurance would cover that, again, with the caveat being depending on what your child has for a disability and, its impact on their overall like daily living functioning. As far as like ABA services, that's typically something that's covered under the umbrella of autism. But, if you have a child that has like an autism diagnosis or like ADHD, or even just a primary of ADHD, I would encourage you to reach out to your insurance company and see what sort of services are covered under your insurance plan, because there are lots of options. Once you kind of go down the rabbit hole, you can see that there are, multiple, at least where we are, companies that do provide these services as sort of like a private, and you don't necessarily have to rely on the school district for those services.
Yeah, and you can find that out by contacting your school district, or if you've already had your child enrolled in school and they already currently have an IEP or 504 plan, and you're talking about taking them out, and that we address later in another episode, right? How that all works. But when I think of like if you've got a learner who's got ADHD and is bouncing off the walls, and so you plan your day to be very movement filled, right? You take lots of breaks, you do a lot of activities that allow for time that they can do something that they want to do, or again, that movement, that flexibility. And then they also have, dyslexia, so they have a reading tutor that they see 3 times a week, and that so that it works together. You figure out how to support your learner in where they're at. For me, I have 2 boys who have Marfan syndrome, but it's their eye issue that really affects a lot of their day-to-day homeschooling life, because I have to blow up everything to make it really big for them to have access to the curriculum that we're using. And even sometimes, that can get really challenging as they get older, because there's more words on a page and all that stuff. And so, it takes a lot more effort on my part to make that all happen. But there have been some great resources out there that I've used, and, to sort of make that come together. They'd have a very different experience if they were in the classroom with this particular challenge. So, so we all sort of have to make do with what we've got. But there are lots of resources out there, whether they're a private one, you mentioned, or you want to contact the school.
Yeah. And the other thing that's nice about it too, and that goes back to what we were saying before about like individualized, is that as a homeschooler, your motivation is to put your learner first, right? Like, what else are you going to do? That's why you chose to homeschool. Right. And, unfortunately, like, if you are a teacher and you have a classroom of 20 something, you want to put the needs of your learners first, but you also are looking at the class sort of as a whole. And so it might be difficult to provide the same level of highly individualized care and instruction that you can as a homeschooler. We're talking about like frequent breaks, right? So like if you're noticing that you're in the middle of a math lesson and your learner is just like really struggling and you can go like outside and do a movement break. Or just like put it away and be like, you know what, your body is telling me that you're maybe not ready for this right now. Like, let's get your body back in, the green zone, use the zones of regulation, and then we'll come back and tackle this later. That is a super luxury of being a homeschooler. That's something, you might get frequent breaks built into your day in the classroom, but you're not necessarily going to be going outside. I mean, it could be just like a break in like the quiet corner of the classroom, maybe a walk, depending on the resources that the school has and the age of the learner, right? So I think you're just able to do things a little bit differently and at a much more individualized level because you only have maybe your one learner, or if you have other kids or something like that. So it's just different.
It's different. I actually have had some pushback though on this particular type of question from even like educators themselves. When I think when I first started homeschooling and I was posting some of it online about what I was doing, I had some former teachers that were friends of mine on Facebook. I wouldn't say that we were like close friends.
Yeah, right.
But a little bit of pushback about that I was promoting homeschooling almost too much, and that there are reasons why kids should be in traditional school, and again, you're a teacher, so it's fine, but I wouldn't give, almost like don't give parents a false sense of confidence that they can do this. Remember, your background is very different, and I wrote back in a very, I don't know, I was respectful, but I in my tone, but I was very forward as far as saying, there's a lot of students that, you work with on a daily basis as a teacher, that even if they have a specialized plan, it doesn't always mean that they need a specialist to enforce it. Like you talked about, like with a child with ADHD or something, there are times absolutely that a child, depending on what the issue is, needs a specialist that is an absolute, top of their game with whatever the issue is, like you would go to a brain surgeon for something like that. I mean, there's definitely specialties that not everybody can do, and that's why you seek out support or help in that field. But generally speaking, a lot of these issues or challenges that kids present with or something can be managed and handled on a day-to-day basis just by the very format of how you homeschool, with how little time it often takes when it comes to doing a lesson. It's 20 minutes versus 45 to 60 in a classroom or whatever. Right. A child with ADHD, you've got all these plans in place in an institutional class because you have to, whereas at home, no, it's how you do it. It's just, they're doing it on the couch, or they're bouncing on their beanbag chair while they're, I don't know, something like it becomes part of what you're doing. But I remember being kind of taken aback by how strongly they felt that way. Like you shouldn't give parents like this false sense of, and I remember thinking like, think back to the kids that you work with on an average basis. I mean, it's the outlier that actually needs a lot of these like really specialized instructional things. That's not the average kid. And again, even if it is your child, you can still attain that as a homeschooler. And so, I remember being kind of put off by their, I don't know, lack of confidence in parents as a whole. Like you don't have to, and then that's the myth, one of the many ones that we've addressed before in previous episodes about you have to have this teaching background to do this, and you do
right. You don't, but what you do need to have, and Anna had alluded to this and several times, and we've talked about it multiple times, is you do have to have, again, the motivation to do it, right? So like if you're noticing that your child is really struggling in an area, and you, despite your best efforts, then that's when you need to be motivated to reach out and ask for help. And I think a large majority of parents would do that, right? Either via social media, or, maybe that's why you're listening to this podcast. Like you're trying to get more information about where to go next. I think a lot of homeschooling parents, and I know both of us feel this way, we're always just like, are we doing like what we're supposed to be doing? Like, are we learning enough? And so we're not just like out here, or most parents just aren't out here being like, whatever, like they learn if they learn, and if they don't, I don't really care. No, I think a lot of them, that's the reason why they pull them out. If they were in school, why they do pull them out of school is because they feel like they're not learning and they can have more success at home. So no, you don't have to be an educator or have a special education background to homeschool your child that may have diverse needs, but you do have to have, the motivation to seek out those resources and advocate for your child. And a lot of times parents who end up homeschooling a child with diverse needs, they've been in school, right? And they are just fed up with how much they have to advocate or over advocate for what they feel is best for their child. And they just feel like they continue to be met with a lot of resistance and a lot of people saying no, we don't see that. No, that's not appropriate. No, they don't need this. So I think a lot of parents that end up homeschooling, older children that have diverse needs are pretty familiar with having to advocate for their child and kind of having a general idea of what is going to kind of work best for them. It's a lot of trial and error, but so is homeschooling a typically developing kiddo or a kiddo that maybe doesn't have, significant diverse needs. So giving yourself a little bit of grace with that. And then also just recognizing that, again, you know your child best. All right, so moving on to our next question, because I feel like we probably tackled that one pretty well. And then again, we have an episode coming up about educating children that may have an IEP or a 504. But anyway, so the next one is someone reached out to say that they would like to find a workbook style program to help their second grader practice spelling. And do we have any recommendations that are fun and interactive?
So I think, Kelley and I would probably agree that there's workbooks are not always, I don't know, what do you say about workbooks? They're not always the best approach for the younger learners. And, even if you have a workbook that you're working out of, sometimes using the lessons in them, but then creating something that's more fun and engaging. I'm not a big advocate for heavy on the workbooks with really anytime, definitely with the young kids. So, if you're trying to get your child to be a better speller, I definitely think that, yes, finding a good program that you're liking that teaches spelling. I don't know necessarily if that will be a workbook. If you're hoping to just sort of give them a workbook and say, basically work through this and you'll be a good speller, I think you'll probably find that that's not, I don't know any program that's going to do that for you specifically. There are some ones, if you're not wanting to do as much yourself with the teaching of the spelling, you're wanting it to be more of an independent sort of thing for them and you just sort of touch base. There are a couple programs that I would recommend that I've used at times. Two of them. One is Night Zookeeper. Have you ever heard of Night Zookeeper?
I have not. No.
It's a fun online. It's very game based, but it aligns with spelling rules, and there's a lot of games. Very fun and interactive and colorful. It is a lot of practice, so you are still gonna have to spend time teaching the spelling rule. And then ABC Mouse, which has been around for a while, that I've seen it. I haven't personally worked with it, but it does get a lot of really high ratings from homeschooling parents as well that use it.
They didn't. The thing about ABC Mouse is unless you're gonna I think there's a way to assign lessons.
Yeah.
But I didn't do it that way. It was just sort of Owen's at gymnastics. Grace needs something to do.
Right. She can
do this for, she can read and color and draw. He's in gymnastics for 2 hours. So she can do an hour of that and then she can do an hour of ABC Mouse. And they have videos and books and stuff and it's all educational. However, you can kind of get in there and go down the rabbit hole with they're just coloring on their tablet. So I would be a little bit, if you're going to use ABC Mouse specifically for as a curriculum, I would just do your due diligence and look into how exactly to assign specific lessons.
Right. So it can be good as so say you're doing the Magic E rule, and so you go on there and you find the lesson on that, and you assign that to your child, so that way you're using it more in that way versus just here's a program you can log in and do whatever.
Yeah, do whatever. Yeah. The other one. I don't know if you've ever used that. I used it for a while when I was when I was teaching younger kids, and then they have it, and it is free. Is Teach Your Monster to Read?
Yes,
that's a cute one. The one that gets tricky about that is they go through the levels, and then once you reach once my kids reached a certain level, it was okay, we hadn't really touched on some of that stuff yet, and it's not so much spelling, it's more reading. But there's a cute little thing that goes with it. He's a monster, and
they get
to through space.
Pick him out.
And it's cute. And they also have Teacher Monster numbers, which my kids never really enjoyed as much. But so So there, are options that are a little bit more interactive than a workbook. I know we've alluded to teachers pay teachers. So if there's, if there's a certain spelling rule, or even if you were to go on teachers pay teachers and literally just search for second grade spelling, games, activities,
You'll
whatever.
be inundated with activities.
There's so many, right? And then if you don't want to pay for them, then you just click free, and then you're kind of at the disposal of whatever is free and on there. But I mean, even some of the stuff that comes in these huge bundles are fairly affordable. $15 for maybe like a huge bundle of different things. So
it's
a wonderful resource that we highly recommend.
I would say looking for activities too that, like you said, they're based off of a spelling rule,
right?
I had talked in other episodes about one of the programs I use, but Explode the Code is a writing and spelling curriculum, and it is a workbook that there's a teacher manual that goes with it that does have a lot more in there for you to do with the child. But again, it is a workbook that you could sit down and have them do the chapter on the spelling rule if you wanted to. I would say that if that's all you did, your child's going to end up hating it, because it is very repetitive. It's a great resource for spelling, and I do it with my kids, and they do enjoy it, but I don't have them sit and do a chapter every week. I mean, that would make them lose their minds. But the chapters are great when you piece it out, or sometimes you take those words. I was going to say games, like two of my favorites to do with words. Simple, but like if you make a tic-tac-toe grid and you each pick a word that, I don't know, like a magic-y word, because you're working on magic-y, and so you're the word, I don't know, cake, and I'm the word bike, whatever. And then, you're playing tic-tac-toe, but you're writing that word. So they're just, that kind of a practice is fun. Bingo, if you print out like a blank bingo board and they fill it in with all words that are aligned with the rule that you're studying, and then, you read off the word and they have to find it. I mean, those sorts of games are really fun and super easy to create on your own in like 2 seconds. You could just pull it out and do it, wherever. Those are ones that are kind of go-tos when I want some more practice. But we had talked about too, spelling's a tricky one, because there are a lot of words that do not follow rules.
Right.
And there's a lot of words that you have to know by sight. I mean, they're a memorization thing at this point. It doesn't follow the rule. It's not, and it's just, so when people say how much their child's struggling with spelling, a follow-up question is always like, well, how much are they reading or looking at books in print? Because, you've said with like your daughter, when she's writing, sometimes she knows and she spelled something is not correct.
Right,
She's such an avid reader. And like, my son's been doing that a little bit too, with like a recent vowel team that we had done was, the EE and EA, and when do you do which? And I basically had to tell him, like, there isn't a rule for when you do each. Like, you need to just, it's based off of sight. Like, why, because, and then there are times that it's both and they mean two totally different things. Like meat and meat. And then, so then we had that fun conversation. He's just like, head spinning.
Yeah, right. I was like, everybody, you're just like, English is hard.
It's tough. And so, spelling is something, but that would be a good follow-up question to ask yourself with the spelling, is how much are they reading? Because that reading, being a more avid reader, can lend itself to promoting more a great spelling practice, and that ability to recognize when they're writing or something that doesn't look right, and then thinking about, is there a rule, or is this a word that I'm just kind of memorizing?
Right. And there are a lot of rules. I think if you're not, even as a former educator, I'm still learning in Pinwheels about some of these rules. Like we just did the R controlled vowels, and it was like ER, like ER, IR, UR. And so we started with ER, and we know that, they all say but like ER you usually find as like a suffix, right? Or it's usually at the end of a word. So like that was a rule. I was like, oh, well, that would have been helpful. But then when we got to IR versus UR, that's when, you just kind of have to it passes like the sight test. Yeah. But there's so many. So I think, finding, even if finding some sort of curriculum to support you with spelling, and then building from there, and trying to use teachers pay teachers, or the other things that we recommended that were just talked about, to help you with some of those more interactive things.
Because spelling it can get dry real fast. Yeah, you're not creative with how you want to do it, or you're not creative with, the game. Like we play a lot of games when it comes to spelling, and I used to do it in the classroom too. I mean, the more games, the more interested they were in
Yeah.
practicing the spelling words. And but I am a big advocate for, rather than just doing root vocab spelling lists, that you, especially in the early elementary grades, that you're doing spelling lists based off of the rule that you're learning. You're not just pulling out random words for them to memorize and spell on every Friday.
And having them sort words, we've done that too. Like a lot of like sorting. I mean, Pinwheels will have you, my kids don't really love it, but I'm sure others would, with like, they have little letter tiles, and so you're supposed to pick them and pull all, and build the word that way. So that makes it a little bit more exciting rather than just writing it. My kids would rather just write it and be done with it. But the spelling lists or based around a rule, and then sort them, right? And then be able to say that this is the rule and this isn't. So, and we definitely, like Anna said, recognize it. Like reading and spelling should go hand in hand, right? Like there shouldn't be, if you are working on a spelling rule, they should be reading words with that spelling rule. Like you shouldn't be just doing, I know when we were growing up, it was just like these abstract, like, spelling lists, and you had them every Friday. You had a spelling test,
and that is still in a lot of schools is still taught that way. Spelling,
it's just it has nothing to do with what you're reading. There's no explanation as to like what the rule is or anything. So making sure that those two things are linked, and then doing the best that you can to kind of find a curriculum, and then build some fun and interactive games around that. And there's so many. There's also like The Measured Mom is another one. This Reading Mama. Those are two blogs that I've used in the past, and they have free resources on there. There's just, there's so much. And I would, caution anyone sort of against going to like Target and picking up, whatever second grade, reading or spelling book that they have, because generally they're not created by educators.
No, they're not aligned with the level at all. I have looked at many of those, and every time I just think, how is this even out here? Like, how is this even, who signed off on this being like labeled a second grade, spelling book, when there's not one word in there that they would learn in second grade?
Use your money to go on Teachers Pay Teachers for The Measured Mom or this Reading Mama and buy something from there, as opposed to giving money to some of these other publishers that are putting out these like second grade workbooks or whatever. And if anybody has any additional questions as far as like, I don't really know how to get started with this, and this is what I was using. And please understand, like, we're not here to like make you feel bad about the fact that you are using one of those workbooks. We get it. They're there. And if you're not an educator, how would you know, right? Like that's shame on the publishing company and whoever else is putting those out there, and knowing full well that
this is not what a second grader or first grader is. No, I know. I agree. It's don't waste your money on that. A great starting point too, and I could actually put the images below that I have, but there's especially with early elementary. So if you've got a first, second, third grader, some of these, or even kindergartner, they're just a great overarching, like, these are the list of spelling rules that are normally covered in these grades. And then you can kind of look up that spelling rule on your own with the beauty of the internet, and you can find, I think your kids have this too. We just started making one, but it's like each spelling rule has its own sheet to thing in like a notebook, so you can go back to the spelling rule at times to review it, or if they're struggling with it again after a time, whatever, you have these like little posters, and it's incredible, the free ones you can find online, and just print them out and stick them in your own little book, makeshift book. Having those spelling rules, because eventually you won't be doing spelling. That won't be something you do your entire homeschooling, career. Vocab will play a bigger part at some point. But spelling, eventually they will have had all the rules and you can move on.
Or they'll just use spell check.
Gosh, yeah, right.
Which is also like a pretty valid point, right? Like, yes, we want our kids to be able to like sit and write and spell, but eventually, I mean, I know it's happening in schools now as far as like Chromebooks and stuff like that. And, when you're out and you're working, how many of us are on either the phone or whatever? And so there is a spell check. So yes, spelling, it is important, to, have a general idea of how to spell words. But also, if your child is not a great speller, it wouldn't like beat yourself up about it too much.
I'm not a great speller. I never have been. And my husband makes fun of me for it, but I never have been a great speller. He's like, but you're a teacher. I'm like, I know, I'm still not a good speller. All right. So the next question that we were asked, it says, I'd enjoy the topic of unschooling our parents' mind. What I mean is, we are first-time homeschoolers, and it's hard to think of all the ways we incorporate school in life with our first grader and kindergartner, we're constantly battling the "is this enough" or "are we failing them" questions, which is very common. So I mean, yeah, did you want to start with that?
Yeah, so it's super valid concern, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier that this is something that I think as a homeschooler you will always be questioning.
Yeah.
I haven't been homeschooling for that long, so I can't say whether it gets better as they get older. You're always thinking about, is this enough? Am I doing enough? Like, are they learning what they should be? Are we failing them by not sending them to traditional school? So it's definitely I've had these same thoughts. I think what's helpful for me is, this idea of like less is more, or like quality over quantity, right? We did our whole episode around like why the myths of homeschooling, like why kids are in school for 8 hours, right? And there's really no research that we could find that demonstrated that kids needed to be in school for 8 to 9 hours a day to make significant academic progress. So the reason that they're in school for that long is because it matches, typical adult work schedule, and people need to work and have childcare, and kids need to learn. So, okay, we'll create these buildings where kids can go and they can learn, and parents can go to work, and that'll be a nice, neat solution to this. And if we think about, again, and I think we talked about this a little bit, if we start to unpack, the typical school day and think about how much, again, this catchphrase, like time on learning there is.
Instructional time.
There's not a whole lot, right? There's really not. If you're envisioning that your child is showing up to school at 8 a.m. and they are right into their work and they are working nonstop. Then they have lunch and recess, and maybe they have a specialist, and then they're right back to it. There's a lot of downtime. There's a lot of little small transitions that happen. Go to the rug, put your backpack away, get your lunchbox, get your snack, do this, do that, do that. And so if you really start to unpack like time on learning, instructional time, you've maybe landed on like a few hours a day. And then if you really start to walk it back, why does it need to be a few hours a day? Well, first of all, we've got to fill 8 to 9 hours because that's how long they're here for. We can't just like speed through our lesson and now we've got 4 hours where they're just sort of standing around not doing anything. So you got to stretch things out. You also have to think about like there's a variety of learners that are all at different levels, so you need to tailor your instruction for that. Small group, whole group, then you've got maybe your like response to intervention groups with your reading specialist or your math interventionist or whoever it might be. So again, once you start to really unpack like how much time on learning does a typically developing, kindergartner or first grader or even, sixth grader need, it's really not that much, right? So that direct, explicit instruction that you're doing, for 20 minutes, half an hour, please don't do a half an hour with your kindergartner at once, but like, unless it's a game, like, that's gonna be that's the meat, right? That's the time. So this idea that we're not doing enough, and then think about all the other experiences. That's the other part that's really reassuring to me, is think about all the other experiences that they had during their day that they wouldn't have being, in your typical school building. We did some caroling at a nursing home. We went for a hike and they got to talk to, people that are, retired and share experiences and practice that socialization that, we hear so much about. They got to help bake something, or they folded laundry, or they created this really cool magnetile structure and, excuse me, and did some like dramatic play with that or some imaginative play. All of that stuff is learning and is valuable. So I think those are the two ways that I kind of, when those thoughts come up, think about how much time on learning is actually happening in a typical classroom, and then what are the other things that my children were able to have access to during their day that they wouldn't necessarily typically developed or in a traditional school. So
Yeah.
that was a lot, but
No, and I agree with all of it. And I think that I go back to the question of what is learning? Like what is it? And when you remind yourself of what it is, right? All those moments that Kelley was just describing, there is immense learning happening during those moments. It's not just the sit down instructional time. And so if you can train your mind, and something I'm currently working on still, but if you can train your mind to see all of that, like I did reading this morning with my kids, and it was a formal, sit down for both of them with it, but then we ended up baking sugar cookies. And so, like what a fun thing to do after reading. And then they ended up just, playing, like I told you, with this old mattress in the basement, creating a boat and whatever else with it for another hour. All of those things are, I would honestly say, of equal importance at this point. I have a second grader and a kindergartner. And so, that not one experience is more important, honestly, than the other. And it's taken some time for me to see it that way, but I really do now. And to your point, I remember I have a friend who's or some friends who have children that are still in school, and I get questions from them from time to time. That would be an interesting episode. Questions from like actual parents that have their kid in school and are like specifically those parents. It'd be interesting to see some of the things that they asked. But the one question I used to get a lot was, like, you're right, my child, who's the same age as my older one, Leo, reading is 50 minutes a day. You said that your instruction with him is 20. Like, how is he possibly getting through everything? And so I did sort of have to break down to her, like you had mentioned, well, reading instruction in a classroom of, now she's at a private school, so you're talking 15 kids in a class, maybe 14. Right, the teacher is probably doing, she's in a reading group, so that means, there's probably a rotation happening. So she's probably getting 20 or so, 15 minutes with that teacher doing maybe a short lesson, and then she's moving on to an independent practice or a group work thing or something. But that actual time with the teacher, it's not that whole 45 minutes or whatever. No, it's actually probably more like a 15-20 minute time frame. But then, to fill the rest of it, because the teacher has to get to the other kids, she's given an independent practice to do or a game to play with somebody else on that spelling or whatever reading technique, whatever. So it looks like her chunk is 45 minutes. But if it was just the teacher in that room with your daughter, she'd be done with that lesson in 15 minutes. Right. And so that's what I find. And it's really funny for me. It's going to be interesting when my kids are older, and it's a grade I haven't taught, because so far, I've taught a slew of different grades from nursery through 5th grade. And so, there's been topics that we've had to cover that I haven't explicitly taught, but a lot of the things that we're doing, I always link back to a memory I have of doing it in the classroom, and it'll still blow my mind when I think of, wow, how I had to do this in the classroom and how long it took or how much practice it took versus doing it with my child and how quick it happened. Or it might be a thing like, wow, I remember this went really fast in the classroom, and for my kid, it's not sticking. So I'm glad I have the time to do a whole week on it or whatever, but being able to play around with it. But it's, that time when if parents are under the idea that they need, 8 hours of school or whatever that is, that's
academic instruction.
That there's just this constant stimulation. And, if anything, there's more research coming out that supports that constant stimulation and the lack of, time to be a creative thinker and just and come up with games and make things out of whatever they have in their house, or that's hindering them in the long run, because then they end up, there's that kind of running joke about kids when they're on school breaks and stuff. The kids that attend the school sometimes really struggle with, what do I do with myself? Because they're so used to being scripted and scheduled all day, every day, that the weekends seem incredibly long to the parents when they have them, because there's not a lot of that practice that, of entertaining themselves or of being, not that they aren't creative kids, but, I wish there was more of a balance, because I do see that now with kids in this day and age, that there is such a, when they go into school, they're on. I mean, it's not like they're always getting instructional, but they are
some sort of expectation to do something, right?
From beginning to end. And so, when you think about more your lackadaisical, easygoing, sometimes mornings or whatever, I guess if you can start to really work to try to retrain your mind that all of what you're doing, whether the experience is going on a hike and you meet someone who's, I don't know, fixing something on the trail, and now they just learned a whole cool thing about, I don't know, something in this area, and then that's just as valuable as the math lesson you were planning to do that afternoon or something. Like they're of equal value, and it's learning, and that brings me comfort when I kind of go back to thinking about what learning is. Right. So when you're beating yourself up over, like, I don't know if I'm doing enough, or I and if you're someone that's on social media, it can be great, but it can be really horrible. And if you are a newer homeschooler and you're comparing yourself to, I don't know, friends of yours that still have their kids enrolled in school, or you're comparing yourselves to homeschoolers who have big platforms with really picture perfect, spaces and little videos that make it look like things are just, I don't know, a certain way. Just get off of social media just for a little bit. Give yourself a break and just disconnect from it and just try to pay attention to your life and your kids for a little while and give yourself some space. Because I know I've done that over the years at times, and it's exhausting, and you don't need to be comparing yourself the way that we so easily do.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Okay. So our last one that we were going to do for this set of questions, and again, we encourage you to send out some questions if you have them. We have a few more, obviously, in the next episode that we're going to talk about, but feel free to submit questions. This one's a little bit more of a personal question for the two of us. The audience member, I guess you could say, asked, I'd love to hear about your transition from teachers to homeschoolers. What has it been like? What you've brought with you from the classroom to homeschooling that has worked well, and what you've moved away from or done differently. So I will say, I think in almost all of our episodes, we've talked a little bit about what we brought with us, and what we've, had to either leave behind or slowly mourn, because it just doesn't work in this particular setting. But, I can go first. I think for me, mine's a little bit different because I didn't go from actively teaching to actively homeschooling. I had a pretty significant gap where I taught, then I was doing an administrative apprenticeship, and then I had my kids, and then I never went back to teaching. I went back to school, and then, went on my different journey of a different career. So for me, there was a break. So it didn't feel so much I'm teaching and now I'm homeschooling. I will say letting go of the structure of the classroom has been something that's been tricky for me, and I've gotten better, and I feel like each year we might get a little bit better at this, but I'm just an organized person anyway, and tend to be pretty type A, so I enjoy a routine, I enjoy a schedule, and so we even have I think we talked about this in one of the styles of homeschooling, we're not using it right now because of the dog, but a little mini classroom downstairs. They each have a desk, we have a rug, we used to do calendar, in the morning and stuff like that. And I like that. It was kind of a little mini school. It was just the two of them, and that felt comfortable for me. The idea of not having that felt very unsafe in a weird way of just this is what I know, so this is what I'm going to go with. And then slowly we've been transitioning away from that, and similar to the question that we just answered, trying to redefine a little bit of what learning looks like, and give myself a little bit of grace. But that's been a hard thing for me, is letting go of the structure. I think that's why I enjoyed being a teacher for a while, was because it was one of those things where it was yep, this is our routine, this is our schedule, this is what we do, it's the same thing every day. Yeah, the lessons change, and I was good at managing all of those little mini transitions that kind of happen throughout the day, and figuring out who's going to do what, all of that stuff played into my strengths. And so that's been a part that's been a little tricky for me. So that's one of the things that's been hard. Then I'll share some other stuff, but what do you think? I went from teaching to homeschool.
Right away. So my experience was a little different. I would say that I agree, though. For me, it was a lot of the structure, and it was what my expectation of output of work, because for a long time that's a lot of how you gauge a student's ability to, are they comprehending things, because you have so many,
right?
So you can't just have a conversation with all of them about, I don't know, something the way you can with your homeschool. You got to have a written response, or I don't know, the math sheet has to get complete because you have to know if they know how to do this math, whatever. And so that for me took a lot of time that I didn't actually need all of that, the way that I would have in a classroom. But I struggled with the structure. I never officially put together like a homeschooling space, although I definitely thought about it.
We talked about it
often. And I went back and forth with it, and I mean, who knows down the line if I do. But for me, once I stopped using, and we've said this too, but the homeschooling, and I think of it as home learning, it really helped me just changing that word around, because it let me let go of school, and I just thought about learning. Where are we learning? How are we learning? What are we learning? Instead of the school. Every time I brought in that word, it was almost not like a trigger in a bad way, but a trigger in like it brought me back to like the school setting and what I was supposed to be doing. And so, but if I say home learning, it's like I don't know. It makes me
takes the pressure off a little bit.
Yeah,
that's not to say that we're trying to like not feel pressure or like we don't want our kids to learn, but like but just learning in so many different ways.
And I too had similar thoughts about like because you have a morning circle, and there are things that I think I miss, or I at times this adds into my own anxiety about things, but I do glorify certain years when I taught, when I had like really great years, and and certain things moments for me that were really special. And there was a good chunk of my career that I did genuinely love what I was doing. I mean, it happened to be before I had kids and the stress of all that on my home life, but there are certain things, like I used to have a poetry reader when I taught third grade. Every morning a different kid would share a poem, and we got to hear and talk about it. So some of those and I think about my kids, they don't obviously have that because we're not in a class of, third grade, or when the way I taught writing workshop, which we've talked about, it's a little bit different. Not that we can't do some similar things with a group of kids at times, but that daily exposure to certain things that I know I was doing in the classroom that really worked, or I would see be really great and useful and work well, that I know my child's not going to have because he's not in that setting, not in that setting. And so then I have to go back to like, but that's okay, because he's going to get it in a different way or something else. And so, but it definitely is a way I second guess myself a lot when I do certain things. And I also have to take into account who my child is, because, you might, as a teacher, think of stuff that worked in the classroom with kids that you had that happened to be very, outgoing or really whatever. And then but your child's not like that. And their experience in the classroom may not have been like that. And so, I do that. I go back to thinking about things that really worked well for students of mine, and then wanting to recreate that for my child, but you can't. And then kind of having those sort of doubts about, man, well, maybe this isn't, am I doing this right type of thing. But yeah, that would be probably the biggest thing. I did for a while hold on to a lot of like my teaching. God, I had so many, with my mother being a former teacher too, like I just had so many, and they were good, but like resources and books. And I mean, I think every school that I've ever taught at used to have books that were like mandatory summer reading for teachers, and then a lot of them were really good. And I had kept all of those. I had so much, and I had boxes and boxes. I finally went through. I'm like, I'm just keeping what I need to use for them, like going forward. Like I'm not going to keep 20 books on teaching writing. I don't need to keep them all. Because it was like, why, it was too much, and it would just always bring you back to a school frame of thinking versus a learning frame of thinking. And so the more I go on that learning side, then I'm able, I move on. Structures and just sometimes I guess opportunities that were really great learning units, or things that wouldn't work to do with just one child at home, but I can remember working really great certain years with kids, and then kind of feeling this like, like I want them to have that, but I can't do it that way, but figuring out another way to do it, I guess, type of thing.
Being
so
creative,
that would be probably my biggest. I also had things that I generally loved designing my classroom space, to be a warm, inviting environment for my students. And so,
I didn't love that part.
See, I know. A lot of teachers don't.
I didn't.
A lot of teachers don't. I loved it.
Bulletin down.
Oh, see, I loved that. I was all about that. The colored paper. Oh, no. See,
it's all right. But
we would have been great.
Giant roll.
We would have been in the classroom together, because I think we would have complemented each other perfectly, because I would have done all that for you, and you could have handled something that I wasn't interested in doing. Because,
like math.
Like math. Because I know some of that stuff I really enjoyed. And also, hanging up student work. I have a little like string that we have hung up where I put some of their work up and stuff too. I can't like not do that, but I do think sometimes of like the displays that I would make with their work or certain things. And and I mean, I'm not doing that. And I was good at it too, which is probably one reason why I love doing that. I'm sure I could call up a teacher friend and be like, hey, I'll come in and do that for you.
If there's any teachers that are listening that want Anna to come decorate their classroom.
Yeah, I did like that. So for a hard thing, I would say it hasn't worked well holding on for me. Any kind of school mentality, school learning, school. I can't really use the word.
Yeah, I've started using the word lessons. That helps. You know what I mean? Like, we've got to go do our lessons. Because, there is obviously time when you need to do your sort of like formal instruction. And so, but then also, just thinking about it more so from like a learning perspective. Something that I've brought with me from the classroom, I guess it's probably just knowledge of how to, I don't want to say how to teach, but like how to break things down and come at something maybe from a different lens, or use questioning to get the child to where they need to be. So that would be something that I think I've definitely taken with me from the classroom is, you get pretty good at like this idea of scaffolding, right? And trying to help kids come to these realizations or these big ideas on their own and kind of have those like aha moments. That's something that I think I brought with me with my kids. And particularly I think more so for math, or talking about like explain your thinking or explain how you know. So like, I think there was a problem. We were working on inequalities in math, and it was like 21 plus 21 and is something than 12 plus 12, and greater than, less than, or equal to. And Owen had put greater than, and I was like, oh well, how do you know? Yeah. And then there were two different answers that I was kind of like willing to sort of, that I was thinking he might say. He did say one of them, which was like, well, 21 plus 21 is 42, and 12 plus 12 is 24, and I was like, oh. Yeah, all right, you're right. But I would have also expected, I would have accepted like, oh, well, 21 and then 12, and then 21 and 12. Like, these both have two bigger numbers. So like this answer, this sum should be there. But that would have been like, if I wanted to challenge him, I could have said like something like, well, how else do you know? Or like, how else could you tell? And like, that comes from just classroom experience and just learning and watching more like veteran teachers and sitting in, I forget what they were, like team level meetings with your curriculum specialist and talking about all that kind of stuff. So I feel like, like questioning and having an idea like where we're going has come with me, but most of the other stuff really hasn't.
Yeah. I was thinking of my art closet. That pretty much came home with me. Oh, because I've been a craft person. I love doing crafts and having that kind of material access to students. I had a closet like that in everywhere I taught, and I did take, because I had bought most of it with my own money. So I just I made sure I brought all that home. Yeah. And we slowly have dwindled it down now after a few years, but I still have a good amount of art. Yeah, I took some books too from so my last year teaching. I did like it was supposed to be K2. It ended up being like K3 special ed. I had a little classroom, and I had a lot of books that I had just collected over the years for that particular age level, and I pack them up. And again, when I was packing up that classroom, I wasn't thinking like, this is it, I'm done, it was just events that happened. It was like, I then moved to another special ed placement, but that was when the district was going through a lot of their union stuff that I didn't really want any part of. And then another opportunity for this like administrative internship came up and allowed me to go back to Fall River. Did that simultaneously, like found out I was pregnant. So it just like, and I just never went back. It would have been like the position I left during COVID if I had never gone back, if I just sort of let it be. I would say, I am forever grateful to have the confidence that I have, teaching my kids after having been in the classroom, that knowledge, like you said, that, you've done this, you've taught this, or like, you do know how to teach, you're good at it, even though it's completely different how you're doing it. A lot of the times it's just that, I am forever grateful to go into this with a confidence that I know parents who don't have that background, must struggle with more than obviously me. And so I'm very thankful that I have that. At times it can be a hindrance, but most of the time it really is. I'm very thankful I have it. Well,
I think we talked about this too, as far as like the curriculum, being able to like look at a curriculum and being like, I don't want to do that. Like,
Yeah.
for example, this week we're supposed to be doing one of the units in Pinwheels, and it's the last unit in level 3. And there's just a lot of stuff in it, and I'm like, do we really need to do this? No, I
Right.
don't. Like, we don't really need to do this. We don't really need to do this.
Yes. Yes.
No,
Right.
no offense, Pinwheels, but like,
I know.
It's just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not fluff. There is meaning behind it, but it's like a lot of the skills that they're practicing. It's like we've got this.
Your
right?
kids
so
don't
like
need the extra.
need this, right?
Yeah.
So like, can we just like do a couple little things
Right.
from this whole? It's supposed to be 7 days in this unit. I think I have it planned out to do all 7, and as I'm looking at it, I'm just like, I just don't feel like doing this. So, and it's just not something that I feel like the benefits, outweigh sort of the, not risks, but like just effort.
Yeah.
And so we can just do a couple of things and then we can move on. And I feel confident.
Right.
I don't feel like, oh my God, am I messing them up? There was a little thought of just like, let me look through this and make sure I'm not like really messing them up. And there was one thing that they're doing with like a suffix that we haven't talked about yet. So we'll do that part. And then there's a couple other little things to just button up level 3. And then we're moving on. And then that confidence to be able to kind of know, all right, what's the purpose of this? Do we actually need to do it? No, we don't. Let's move on.
Yeah, no. So that is great. And then I would say, I became a certified curriculum specialist. So working with curriculum and tailoring it towards an age group or, an interest level or whatever, or, this is the topic, but we need to relate it to science. How do we do that? I loved doing that. That was really fun for me. I almost wish I had gotten that earlier on in my career because it really was fun. And again, it was something I felt very confident doing and I felt like I did it well. And so with my kids, when there's an interest that arises, like we had talked about with, this being the 100 years since the whole Balto, excursion in Alaska and the Iditarod race and all of that becoming, very quickly I was able to put together a whole unit for us that, sure, I did search Teachers Pay Teachers and found a really fun reading thing that went along with it. So I utilized that. But, we ended up doing some stories with it, a writing activity, a craft with it. I ended up creating sort of a thematic unit. We watched some things about it, stuff that ended up coming together really quickly that I know not everybody I created my own math worksheets and put like Iditarod things on it, like to like a code cracker type thing. I created some curriculum just out of nothing, which was something that I love to do. So for me, I know I have friends who homeschool sometimes and they want to do more of that, like interest-led learning, like, well, this has come up and so I want to, and they'll search for things and sometimes they find stuff, but they're like, but it was only, really it's just reading practice. I was hoping to make it like a unit, like a thematic unit. I can't find, so then I give them ideas or whatever. And I'm very grateful that comes to me, naturally, and that right when there's an idea. Recently, we have a friend who's been diagnosed with an illness, and my kids are all wanting to learn about it now. It's just everything we can kind of figure out about it. And so it's worked its way into another type of unit for us. And but I don't find that stressful, whereas I have, other homeschooling friends that will say they find that incredibly stressful. They want to follow their kids' interests, but they just they also want to follow the curriculum because they just need to. And I do follow curriculum to certain extents, but I'm very easygoing with sometimes following the curriculum, but applying it to a different interest as well, because that's what I was doing when I was developing curriculum for those years that I was practicing it. So I'm very grateful for that. Yeah. So and I don't know.
You should be one of those people that like lists the stuff on Teachers Pay Teachers.
I know. My mom used to say that to me too, and I used to joke around with like, I have all the ideas. I don't have like the software, like how they make it.
Yeah, look they do make it look nice. Yeah.
They make it. Yeah, they make it look so great. And I don't have, and I'm sure I could look into it, like the kind of digital software to make the pictures, the graphics to make it look so good. And then, because I thought of that many times, and I did play around with it once because there was a few reading things that I remember I really wanted more of, and I didn't find much on Teachers Pay Teachers, which was surprising. And I will always remember this. It was the silent G.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't remember what was happening in my classroom at the time, but silent letters were like really big for some reason. And silent G, I was looking for I was being very specific. I wanted like a story with silent G in it. Yeah. Had a lot of, I ended up writing a story called The Gnat. And I did. I posted on Teachers for like 50 cents. People have bought it over the years. But it's not, it's doesn't have a ton of graphics. It's a story. If you're wanting to teach the silent G, it's great. Download it. But it doesn't have all the pretty, way that some people know how to do it.
Definitely figure it out.
If I could teach myself how to do that someday.
Okay.
So we didn't get obviously through every question, but that was okay. We were only hoping to get through a chunk. So we will work on more the next episode. And, we want to thank you all so much for sending in the questions that you did, because your curiosity and honesty and real life experiences are what make this community strong. And we love getting to walk alongside you in this journey of homeschooling. And this episode just, episodes like this remind us of how many families there are out there that are learning and growing and trying to figure this out all together. So anytime that we can lend, our knowledge as former educators, and you find it useful, that's a win for us.
Yeah, and so if you enjoyed this episode or any of our episodes, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, share it with a fellow homeschool parent or anybody else that you think would enjoy listening to us chat. And then, like I said, continue to send us your questions. It doesn't necessarily have to fit into a question and answer episode. It can fit into, we have so many different ones kind of on the docket coming up, for the next episode. So I'm sure it will fit in somewhere. And then I'm sure somewhere down the line, we'll do another question and answer. So if for some reason it doesn't fit, then we'll put it there.
Or like when we get a lot of questions about, I don't know, teaching writing, it's like prompts us to sort of make an episode about it. Yeah, so the questions are really helpful.
They are super helpful. And then you can always post, questions or comments on our Facebook page, The Graded Escaped. We are here to, help encourage, and again, like Anna said, just lend our expertise as former educators, to all of you. So until next time, keep the moments light and the lessons meaningful. Thanks for escaping with us.